Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Ears to the East, where today we're just going to talk. We just finished recording a video, and it always happens when we finish recording videos. We just start waffling, and we were just talking about music anyway, so we thought, let's press record again. Because interestingly enough, actually, we're gonna raise one of this channel's favorite topics. You just showed us, Benedict, you have the new Hanabie album.
Oh, you mean this? Yeah, right.
Yeah, we were sort of briefly talking about it, which kick off from where we kind of left off with the fact that the Hanabie album, this is an interesting one. I'd be really interested to know what people think about this in the comments. I mean, my comments on Hanabie have been well noted. I like them, although they're not my usual style. I like a lot of things about them. I kind of felt this was a good album. I think it's getting a huge amount of hype, which is great because they're an interesting band. But I felt like it was just kind of, it was them doing them, you know, it's them doing them. If you like them, you like them, you like this, you know. It wasn't like world-changing stuff. They're just a very interesting band with a very interesting record.
I mean, I think we kind of reached the consensus that it's a good album, but doesn't quite reach the heights of the previous ones.
Do you mean on like a song-by-song basis, though, or do you mean like
I feel like Girls Reform Manifest has a lot stronger individual songs, like We Love Sweets, things like that, or like, I don't know, LCG.
I said before, it just feels like they played this one a little bit too safe. Like, it's a great album, don't get me wrong, it's still a phenomenal album. I just feel like there could be more there, like more experimentation, and I just feel like they knew what they wanted to do with this album and then just kind of stayed in the formula. It feels formulaic.
Well, here's my thing though, right? Because for me, like Hanabie, when it comes to writing, one of the reasons I've liked them so much, considering again, this is not a style of music that I would usually go for, is that unlike so many of their peers, for me, is the fact that they are interesting. You listen to like We Love Sweets, as you mentioned before. Yeah, it goes through a bunch of different phases. Even with like Pardon Me, it's got like interesting little changes here and there. They mix many things, and so in a way, they've kind of set quite a high bar compared to their peers, in my opinion, at least. I think that's why so many people have gravitated towards them. So for them, doing something which is safe by their standards is still pretty interesting by the standards of most of their peers. It's just we're kind of used to being surprised. So I think
that's true, and I also feel like it, like playing it safer, led to it having a more consistent experience overall over the whole album.
True.
I mean, it's kind of the same like we said with the other one. Also feels a bit like played safer. So maybe I just listened to this like a couple of days ago, the first time. I've listened to it a couple of times, but we will see. Maybe it will grow over time.
Yeah.
It's packaged really well. There was definitely a clear vision for this one, probably before even coming in. But sometimes you just do need to, I feel like, throw a spanner in the works a little bit and just have that one song on an album that like really is like contrastically different. And this just feels
have
like
this one little song that's just purely electronic. Also lyrics by Hetsu. I don't know if you Me, the Ultimate Invader of the Universe, which is a pretty neat song, but it's just under 2 minutes.
It needs to be longer.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, again, it can be something short, and I do actually think that's a fair point. You know, having that one song on there to kind of shake things up a little bit is good, because I mean, sometimes you can have an album which is very designed, and then you design it to have the one crazy song in there. You know, the one song that is like really stand out and different. This is one of the things that, as you guys know, I kind of, as a BAND-MAID fan, I've been somewhat critical that on certain albums, BAND-MAID will have like a whole album of really good songs, but they don't throw in that one which is like really different, and then it will just appear as a non-album track. I've said so many times, like Memorable, About Us. These are just songs where you're like, and Start Over. It's like, if that was on an album, it'd be like a really cool thing just to throw in the mix to like completely. So yeah, sometimes just having that one song which is really different can be, even if it's not your favorite song, it can make an album very refreshing.
Yeah. So what do you guys think of like album openers and album like closing songs and stuff like that?
So many people
talk about this one. Sorry, Howard, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, so many people said about Conqueror by BAND-MAID that when it came out, I remember there were so many people who were like, if you take the playlist and you put it in reverse, it's much better. And there was a lot of people.
It's funny because Conqueror was my very first album, so
it should be the last.
Yeah, Page was the very first Bateman song I ever heard, a bandmate song that I ever heard. So that's, yeah, it was an interesting experience as well,
Did you
because I
say
was
Baby
expecting a
Mate?
lot more rock, and that song doesn't really have it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a surprise one actually. Although I know Conqueror has some issues, I've always said that, you know, I love the production on Conqueror. I really hate the mix.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's mixed very poorly, but the production is really good.
I like it.
I think the bass gets lost in a lot of mud there. I think they could have made more space to make the bass more clear. And you know, it has its moments, but as a general, I don't think it's very well mixed. But it is beautifully produced, and I think musically it's so creative. It's that album. This is why Conqueror is still my favorite. It's that album that I was talking about, where it really kind of like BAND-MAID flex the full range of their ability.
But like, just to clarify, what's the difference between mix and production for you?
Okay, so mix. I won't get too bogged down in this, but basically, mix is reference to both the levels and the EQs, the way they're balanced. Production tends to be like the choice of effects that are used, the sounds that are like
so like post-production probably.
No, production really. You know, all the way through. But I mean,
yeah, I mean, when I say post-production, it's after the recording.
Well, sometimes, I mean, sometimes it's the choice of effects at the time that are used, you know, like the guitar sound, the way that the drum kit's set up for recording. That's also kind of a producer's gets very involved in that. I would say though, the one which is always difficult is when it comes to compression, because compression can appear both in the mixing phase, the production phase, and the mastering phase. It's all in all three. And I know a lot of people talked about compression issues on that album, which is why I want to be a little bit careful, because you could dive into a lot of different things on the different songs there. But as a general, the mixing,
I think there's one song also
very muddy, in my opinion.
The Dragon Cries, I think.
It's maybe
that song that also was produced or mixed by someone else, and you can hear it.
Well, the thing is, that is really beautifully produced. I love the sounds, but the mastering, I'm not going to go on, because I did a whole video just talking about this one song. I love the song, I love the production, but the mastering destroys it. I can't even listen to it, because like the drums just sound like on the top end, because it's so sat on that there's like no definition between any of Akane's hits. I'm like, you got this drummer and you did this to her recording, it just kills me. So yeah, I have very mixed feelings. But Conqueror, if I just look at BAND-MAID, if I just focus at BAND-MAID, that's their best album in my opinion, because they just flex so many different ideas. So much happens on that. It goes from like pop anthems with Page to like Rene is like this thrashing song. It's got so much going on. I adore that album. It's brilliant. So yeah. I love
would
their
say
other stuff,
it's top three for me as well, but I like the more energetic style more, and that's more of a calmer album, I would say.
Okay.
In general, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, compared to Unseen World, there's no denying.
I would say that Conqueror at its most frenetic, its most frantic, is just as energetic as Unseen World. It just has the ability to do more than one thing. Whereas I would say
Unseen World is way more energetic, or maybe not energetic, but wild in composition and things they are doing in there. It's a lot crazier than Conqueror, in my opinion.
But my issue with Unseen World is
done in a more intense way. Maybe that's a better description.
There is a shift towards some intense zone, like feeling songs, but I think okay, so some people at level, now this is not what I would say personally, but I can understand why, and I'm sort of falling somewhere in the middle. Some people complained that Unseen World sounds a little bit too messy, and they were sometimes talking about that sort of very frantic sounding guitar the Konami uses. Now, I kind of like that, because I first heard it in Screaming, which was a song where it worked perfectly, and on some songs it really works great, but there are some where perhaps, I think, because there's so much of that on Conqueror, that it kind of ends up watering itself down, is kind of the problem. Is I feel like, whereas the craziest songs on Conqueror hit really hard, because they, like, you know, led up to, on Unseen World, by the time you're through to like 4 or 5 tracks in, it's like it kind of can't quite keep the same frantic level that you have with the first 2 tracks. I mean, you know, by the time you got to the end of like No God, you're still at the beginning of the album, and it's like it can't maintain that for the entire thing. So
for me, it can. I really think this is.
Really?
I mean, there are even songs like Giovanni, which is song number 10, which are absolutely crazy. I don't even know how to describe that song.
Giovanni, I've got to be honest, is probably one of my least favorite songs.
Yeah, it's also not my favorite, but just what is that song? I mean, it's crazy.
It's
totally
it's
crazy.
Good. It's good. Yeah, I think that's the thing, though. It's crazy, but I don't think it quite feels like it has as much. Okay, maybe this is what I mean, is that like it feels to me almost like Conqueror's got more purpose. It's like it's very intent. It knows what it wants to do. Whereas I think
that
sometimes
I can agree on. Yeah,
Unseen World feels a little bit like it's flailing. Like it's like so intent on being crazy that it's kind of struggling to really quite, you know.
Well, but
it's like
that's kind of its thing, I would say.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. That does make sense.
And I find it interesting that you were talking about the guitars, because to me the biggest difference from Conqueror to Unseen World is the drumming and the bass. It's just way more intense in Unseen World, in my opinion.
Now this is difficult because the thing is that yes, but again, I would put that down to a similar thing. I mean, by the way, I just want to point out, I mean, the reason I mentioned about that guitar thing is because so many people came up saying it's one thing they didn't like about recent BAND-MAID things. I've actually really liked it, but just in the context of an entire album, I can understand more how people would get frustrated if you're hearing that sound too frequently. But I really do like I kind of consider that like a signature Konami sound now. However, if we're talking about the bass and the drums, again, a similar thing. I wouldn't know. In some ways, you can tell that there's some technical improvements, but I don't necessarily feel like the technical improvements in their playing have gone towards producing better songs, just kind of more frantic songs. So in a way, I see your point.
That's true.
It's more frantic. It feels like a little bit
but
like sometimes it gets. Yeah, but it's again, I guess
admit
it's that thing. Yeah, frantic, but it's kind of like, I guess I'm thinking of a difference between like frantic as in flailing or frantic as in like landing several effective punches. And it just kind of feels like the punches are coming fast, but I'm not sure if they hit as hard. I guess that's the best analogy
that's
I can
fair.
really think.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I would definitely say if you want something which was the sound of chaos, then yes, Conqueror works. And I guess that's the really thing, isn't it? Like if I wanted, we were talking about video game music the other day.
Black Hole, it just sucks everything in.
Like, yeah, Black Hole was like one of those songs where on its own, I don't know how much I'd appreciate it, but like right at the end of the album, it's just like, yeah, it's like one of those songs where you're like, you knew what you were doing here. You knew what you were putting here. It's like,
I mean, I just listened to everything, so it's kind of fresh in my mind.
Yeah, okay,
yeah. To me, saying like Conqueror is as intense as Unseen World, I guess no.
Well, see, now you said that, I'm really intrigued about so I think it's the difference between like emotional intensity and actual full-on intensity.
Yeah, true.
I'm really interested now because like you've been doing your listen through the BAND-MAID, but you haven't yet listened to the one you haven't listened to is Made in Japan. And
I mean, this is the re-release.
Yes, that's the same one I've got actually. Yeah, it's really cool that the little sort of like the white on white.
Pretty nice design.
But the interesting thing about that is, so okay, the first few albums, I mean, they slowly added some songs they wrote on their own, but as you know, the first few albums they didn't write anything. Neon's
just leaving.
Made in Japan. Obviously, the very first one was like when even picking the writers, it was like, you know, they were just, the band was kind of like designing itself, so even the sound wasn't particularly sure at that time. It's very different now. I know this is the one you haven't heard. I think that although it's probably the least BAND-MAID album, there are little moments on there where you hear things and you go, yeah, that definitely inspired the BAND-MAID sound later on. And there's like these little moments where you're just like, and do you know what, even though it's very,
I really had that with New Beginning, because it feels pretty like straightforward rock in the style, not like as specific as Conqueror or something, just more the general rock, which I'm usually not a big fan of. It's just kind of, I would rather listen to some metal. but
yeah, you're gonna hate Made in Japan.
There's very beautiful sprinkled parts and very intriguing parts all over the place. And that's kind of what they went into then later.
I'm going to put out an opinion. I'd be interested to know what Neon thinks of this one, because I've left him in silence. I'm also I'm really interested to know what people think in the comments here. I would say that for me, Made in Japan is I go back to Made in Japan much more than I go back to Brand New Made or New Beginning, because for me, those two albums kind of feel like someone else writing BAND-MAID, but it's not as good as BAND-MAID writing BAND-MAID. So I don't really listen to those albums so much. You know, everything from Just Bring It onwards, it feels like BAND-MAID making BAND-MAID. But with like Brand New Made, it's like so different from anything they would write on their own, and yet still kind of has all the quintessential qualities that I feel it has more value to go back and listen to. I feel like I'm listening to something like an interesting experiment. I listen to it in the same way that I'd listen to BAND-MAID, in that I kind of feel like I'm just hearing BAND-MAID doing something different. So it feels like it has more value to me than the two.
It makes me excited.
I'd be interested to know what you think of it, certainly. We definitely need to do a follow-up video when you've heard that. But Neon, any thoughts on that? I know you've had like a bit of a history of BAND-MAID. I don't know if you can remember what songs on what albums.
No, obviously you guys know that I personally love BAND-MAID. There was so much there I wanted to say, but I was quite enjoying just seeing the backwards and forwards between you two, actually, to be honest. So I was just being a viewer for a little bit. It's nice hearing the opinions. Probably not what you want to hear. You're gonna get like you're gonna get freaking DP'd a little bit here, but I very much rest on probably Benedict's side when it comes to the difference between Conqueror and Unseen World. I like Unseen World for its chaos. For me, it's very controlled chaos, though. It's chaos with like a purpose. Like you can see the plan behind it. Although you could probably say at times it's a bit much and there could be something else on that album. I always say, like I just said before, you could always put a spanner in the works just to mix it up a little bit from time to time. But for me personally, listening to that album from start to the very last song, to the finishes, is just pure fun. It's just a good fucking time.
I mean, you have like the Cyanarchy Dories and stuff on there, so there is a little bit of variation. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying
yeah. It's not. It's not like every song's the same, but yeah.
I think maybe where I differ from a lot of other people is like in the same way that I think that, you know, like Reno works better because Page is on that album. I think that, like, you know, you listen to I mean, so you had About Us came out pretty much right after, and well, you know, near enough. And I can't help but feel like something like No God would just work so much better if About Us was also on that album, because the chaos would feel so much more purposeful if it was accompanied by something that showed that level of restraint, because it kind of just makes the punch all that more impressive. And again, this might come back to the fact that, I mean, I know Benedict says the same thing on this, so it makes it interesting that we have a different opinion here. But the fact that me and Benedict definitely are very much album listeners. So that's perhaps where I'm approaching that from. But again, you know, I mean, same thing with Benedict, but he obviously has the opposite opinion on that, or at least a differing opinion. I just feel like if About Us had been on that album, then it would have just created such an interesting contrast that everything else would have just hit harder. And so therefore it's no detriment to the other songs. It's just interesting the context you get when an album has that level of variation in there.
But I mean, we were talking about that also with Hanabie, maybe to get back to this one, that it also has like a few, it also has like a nice breakup in between. And I agree with Howard, having something completely different. Then again, when you go back into the style from before, it always kicks in a lot harder in a full album. And
the counter argument to that is if you stick something in that feels too out of place, people will complain. So no matter which way you kind of come about this, there's always going to be somebody that's not happy.
There's always going to be someone complaining on either side. I agree. Yeah. Interesting. Actually, can I just ask for a throw into this one? So we've established Conqueror. Now, I've always been very intrigued talking about World Domination as an album. I'm sorry to go back to the BAND-MAID thing again. I'm just very interested as a comparison because World Domination, I'm pretty sure I might be thinking this, but it's a longer album than Conqueror. Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. Mine are in like a cupboard somewhere. So it's a longer album. And I know there was a lot of things said about the situation under which it was recorded. Now, for me, like World Domination is an example of an album where you can pick out some just truly amazing songs in that album. I mean, it has like some of their class A best hits on there. But as an album, I kind of feel like it's one of those ones where it doesn't quite, has a bit more of variation maybe than Conqueror, but sorry, than Unseen World, but not that much variation. And it isn't as frantic as Unseen World either. But for me, rather than being frantic or varied, it just has some really strong hits in there that kind of manage to like keep the head above water. You know, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because writing an album is so different from just writing good songs. If it was just writing good songs, then you know, BAND-MAID would never have to be subjected to this kind of interrogation. But yeah. what's your thought on World Domination?
I mean, on this one, I would really agree with you that there's not as much variation. Or yeah, there is a bit of variation, but not as much. Pretty much is the same style throughout the whole album. But it doesn't really bother me in this because the songs are just so good. This is probably my favorite BAND-MAID album. I mean, I didn't make a real how you call it ranking yet, but I absolutely love this album. I mean, so many great songs on here. Yeah, just a banger throughout, and yeah, also not as frantic and maybe like overwhelming as Unseen World. So the perfect mix of the two styles, I would say.
I can see that. Yeah, again, I can see some people thinking it's like the least of both worlds, and some people thinking it's the most of both worlds. So again, it depends on which side you stand. But yeah, I must admit, I've often talked about the fact that I find the album doesn't quite. It feels longer than most of their other albums,
but it also is.
Yeah,
but I think it's around 1 hour.
It is quite a long one. But
yeah,
I would say that it's one of those
songs.
ones. You know those albums where you're just listening and then just like one song starts up and you're like, oh fuck yeah. It's like that album just does that like a bunch of times. You're like, oh yes.
I mean, runtime is also a big thing you have to think about when you're doing an album, because this one, for example, it's just 30 minutes, half of the time.
I knew you were going to bring that around. Good job.
Yeah, but also the earlier albums.
Wait, hold up.
This is also like just 30 minutes, I think, 35 minutes around that time, and the earlier albums.
What do you guys prefer more? Do you prefer like a longer album, or do you prefer just doesn't matter how many songs are on there, as long as it's good?
Well, to me, I think 1 hour is kind of the maximum. If it's longer, it's most of the time can get a bit tiring or tedious, and you just want to get through it. At least that's how I feel. And yeah, recently I'm really enjoying like shorter albums as well, because you just can throw it in whenever, because it's not like, okay, I want to listen to an album, but I don't have an hour of time. Maybe I just have like 45 minutes, so I won't make it through the whole album, and then I have to split it up with something like this. I can just say, yeah, quick, half an hour. Let's go.
All right, here's a question for you then. Less songs, but longer, or more songs, but shorter?
I would say it depends completely on the song.
I think it depends.
That's not generalizing.
I would definitely agree with what Ben said about like an hour. It's not always, but usually is a good maximum. And it's a similar thing that, like, you know, I mean, obviously albums, you get mini albums as well. I'd say anything less than half an hour, it doesn't really feel like an album anymore. You've got to have at least half an hour to feel like you've listened to an album. But then again, I mean, like, I really like some punk albums, which are just great, you know, when you don't want a punk album to be long. You know, a punk album, in the same way the songs are short. I mean, the same thing, you've got like a bunch of 2-minute songs, then you're not going to get like an hour-long album where you've got 30 songs on there. You know, you're going to want it to be quick. And so, you know, yeah, I do respect and appreciate the length of an album can often be very much intrinsically connected to the length of the songs, and the length of the songs are very much intrinsically connected to the genre, because some genres are about simple and punchy, and some genres are more about songs that each have their own progression and are, you know, slightly more lengthy and, you know, structured. So I think the genre is a big factor in that. But yeah, I think when it comes to something like Bandmaid, they're in an interesting place in the middle where they have some songs that are slower and more thoughtful, but they usually don't put them on their albums. And they have some songs that are more frantic and mental. So I think they're one of those songs where, one of those bands where, yeah, like 45 minutes feels about right for Bandmaid for me, you know. It's because it's like any of these things, you could always want more, but the best thing is an album that satisfies you, but kind of leaves you wanting to go back and start from track one again. That's a perfect album.
That's how you know how that an album is really good, or at least you enjoy it really much. That when the last song finishes and the first song comes back up, that you can just keep going.
Yeah, yeah. You leave it on repeat play, and then when it comes around again, you go, "Oh, I'm just gonna let that continue."
Because sometimes there's some albums, and you're like, "How many songs? Okay, 3 more songs. Yeah, let's go."
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's not a death knell, but it's always a bad sign if an album has like skippable tracks.
Yeah,
that's usually a sign that something wasn't quite tight enough, or that they just maybe had an experimentation that didn't work, which I respect. But as a general, you know, if even the worst tracks on an album are listed,
my rule is I let one song, I let it slip, because that's just maybe not for me. But if there's 2 songs I wouldn't like, then it can't get to my favorite albums.
I totally agree. Because it's not really an album then if you're skipping more than once. Yeah, I agree. You can have, but the thing is, if you've got one skippable track, unless it's
you can still endure it.
Yeah, you can just kind of enjoy it like a bridge between 2 good things. But yeah, not if it's like a really long track. That would be killer. So if it's like a sort of medium length track.
Yeah. So about song length, I would say also a good mixture is important, because I really enjoy like longer songs. For example, Brightier, the Brave New World Revisited. Pretty long song, but amazing. But if you just have songs like these, I think also it can be a bit tiring. If you would have an album just consisting of like 8-minute songs, I mean, if they all really are freaking amazing, but there's also always the risk there's some part of it that you don't like, and then you have to endure that for 8 minutes.
Oh shit! I just noticed the cat behind Neon. Sorry.
Yes, before. That's why I mentioned the cat food.
Like with like Brave New World Revisited, that's kind of like, that's an example of like an interesting song though, where they've gone in a different direction, and so, you know, like you said,
just imagine a full album full of songs like these. I think it wouldn't work as well as if you have some shorter, more straightforward songs in between.
I think if each song is too long, then the song itself starts to feel like such a journey that when it finishes, you're almost like, oh, well, I'm done. Oh, that song's finished. Oh, that was a big journey. And almost thinking of it as part of an album starts to feel more unnatural. So in a way, you want a song to stick somewhere within the contemporary, let's not go too much over 6 minutes unless we got a reason kind of region. Because you want them all to still feel like they're linking up as parts of an album.
One example I'm thinking of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Opeth.
I was just about to say
Asian band. But like the first Opeth album, for example, it's very weird and just consists of like extremely long songs, like over 10 minutes and stuff. It's pretty hard to listen to, even though the music is great.
What about like Melt Banana then, where they have songs that are usually about 15 seconds? Like, we're done. Like, they do this thing where they go up live on stage. It's like, we are now going to perform like 10 songs in 5 minutes.
Easiest paycheck ever. They're onto something.
It's like the only band I know who can go up as like sort of the support act and like still play like 3 albums. Oh, fuck it. Oh, man.
I just checked out Koshuni, which the whole album, it's just, I think one song is over 3 minutes and the rest it's under 3 minutes. So everything is pretty short, but it still works. I think it really depends on the music. You can't really put a rule on that, how long a song should be.
I guess the thing is that if you feel kind of like we again, like the songs are almost like a microcosm for the album, in that when you get to the end of a song, you should feel both fulfilled by it, but also kind of like eager for more. You know, sort of like that was a complete package, but I want a little bit more. And the same way they were saying that when you get to the end of an album, you should feel like satisfied, but kind of happy for it to go around again. when you get to the end of a song, you should be like, wow, that's great. But in the same way that you want to kind of re-listen to that song, the next song comes up and you go, oh, but it's this one next. And it kind of keeps you sort of lead.
But I think
kind of
that's
like,
we could get to the point that Neon was talking about before, talking about like beginning and ending songs of an album, because that's like the two songs that you are listening to
yes.
when you get to the end and then back to the beginning. And also I have to say, this one, amazing. The first song, it's just a purely electronic song, so very different.
Which album
than
is this? Sorry,
Hanabie's
Hanabie.
new album.
Hanabie one, yeah.
First song, Blast Off, just purely electronic, very different from the rest of the style. And the last song, Today's Good Day and So Epic, it's probably my favorite song. It has such an uplifting, fun, positive vibe. Yeah, and then I'm just in such a good mood every time I listen to this so far. Such a good mood. Then this electronic stuff from the first song comes back in, and I just keep going. It's really good. Like this transition from last to first song.
What do you feel about intro tracks? Because that was a thing, and it's become less of a thing, but you still get a little bit of it. I mean, like for example, with Unleashed by BAND-MAID, it wasn't, and call it an intro track, but sticking an instrumental right at the beginning was kind of
the first one.
From Now On.
Yeah.
It kind of felt to me like it was. I sort of said about this at the time. It felt like a complete song, but the fact they put an instrumental first, it functioned like the intro tracks of old. It was like it builds you up, it gets you hype, and then Psyche comes in, and you get your first like full band song. So in a way, you can do an intro track, and it feels a bit cheesy now because it's a thing that was done like 20 years ago, 10 years ago maybe, and isn't done so much anymore. But I think it's kind of like if you treat your album as like a full event, no harm in doing that. You can have a lot of fun doing a song that has no other purpose than to build people up and really intensely like inject hype into the listener. Because as you say, the first and last song are very different from every other song in the album, and that they don't have to worry about continuation. They are the one that starts and the one that ends. Again,
I'm not a Japanese band, but one of my favorite bands of all time that really love to do that with opening songs is Trivium. They got these like really, really slow, hauntingly like eerie guitar things that they do at the start. But the way that they build it up is that it ends, and then it's like whatever that second song is, it's like straight. As soon as that song finishes, that opening song, it's like straight into the album, which I really like that. Always been a big fan of how Trivium open up their albums. So amazing.
In general, I would say I like it, and especially if an album has I cannot talk. If an album has a strong theme, then I think an introduction that puts you into that mood is perfect. But I think it can also be a little bit overdone. I'm not sure if I have it here. Hold on Shadow Corps by Yosei Teikoku, for example. The first song, it's just almost 5 minutes. It's no music really, it's just atmospherical sounds.
Yeah,
and I mean, it's also kind of cool, but I think it's just
that probably goes into the realm of a little bit too much for me as well.
Yeah, it's a bit too long.
Talking about going actually back to an album you were talking about earlier, and sorry, keeping on banging the BAND-MAID drum here, but I think one of the best intros and one of the tightest ones is Unseen World, the very first few seconds of Warning. Now that is how you start an album. That is how you start it. Let's have a little bit of MIDI strings, and then
I mean, it fits this album really well.
It's fucking amazing. I love that. It's like probably the most quick and effective hype intro to an album I can think of. I mean, as a song, I like it. It's not my favorite single by them, but as a way to start an album, that is fucking so good.
Like compared to Conqueror, which we were talking about before with Page, which might not be the perfect intro, in my opinion.
I think it's a very good intro, but I think
it would have fit better like later in the album at some point.
Everyone says this, and I got to be honest, I kind of disagree, because I think that I get why people think that, but I think it's good because it really kind of it gets you sort of singing along. It builds this sort of sense of scale and size and event before you sort of plunge into the rock. So it kind of like builds up an atmosphere, and then you plunge into like a roller coaster, building up and then falling down. I think it does a very good job of, and it's a great song in its own right. I mean, I prefer Page as a song to Warning, even though they're both in my top echelons of BAND-MAID songs. I would say Page is the better song overall. And it is a song that builds up. It has a crescendo. It's going up, up, up all the time. So I do feel like it's that roller coaster lift. But yeah, that's more of a long game. But as just an immediate,
I mean, I agree with everything you
intro.
said, but still, I wouldn't say Page is a song that really gets me going. Like when I was to listen to BAND-MAID, I want to listen to some energetic rock, and that song just isn't it. So when I'm starting the album, I'm kind of, okay, when is Page over? When do I get to the good stuff? You know, kind of like that, even though I like the song. And it's kind of similar for me to the feeling of like the other one, because I mentioned before, like I don't really like Metal Kingdom as the very first song of the album. Rather, I think it works much better as the very last song, because it's just too long as an intro and also has the same, doesn't really get me going feeling.
I think that's probably the difference then, is because I think maybe because a lot of people who naturally like BAND-MAID probably don't like Page as much as a song, whereas for me, I really like Page as a song. I know it's a very simple song, but I just think it's such a good song, and it really, for me, it really gets you going, but in like a very sort of medium tempo, big way. It feels like you want to sing along. It feels very rousing, but it's still slow. It feels slow, so it's kind of like got you excited, but it's got you used to a mid tempo. So when the fast stuff comes in, it just like feels so perfect. So yeah, I got to be honest. I think you have to actually really like the song for what it is for it to have that effect. But if for you it's not really what you came to BAND-MAID for, then yeah, I can understand why that might actually feel more like a roadblock between you and what you actually want to listen to.
That's why because I also like the song, that's why I would like to have it later in the album, because I would like to listen to it, just not as at the beginning.
That's interesting. Yeah, I could take it and leave it as an intro, but I must admit that I really do like it as an intro, and partly because I've often said putting Page as track 1 of Conqueror for me is the most punk thing BAND-MAID ever did. It's like that is like, you know, right after World Domination, that is like such a statement. It's like, we can put a ballad at the beginning of our album and you'll like it. I'm like, fucking win. Anyway, we've got 2 minutes before Zoom tells us that we're poor motherfuckers. So I enjoyed this. This is fun. We just we talk. I have to wonder about what I'm going to make the subject of this video, but I guess it's albums, BAND-MAID HANABIE, all that kind of stuff. We talked about everything. I'll put something on there, and hopefully everyone who watches this will be happy with what I picked. Anyway, look, thank you as always for you guys listening. Thank you for our chief audience member, Neon, Neon and Kitty. What's the cat's name, by the way?
Athena.
Whoa, we've got a god in the room.
Nice. I wanted to name my last cat Hades because it was a black cat.
She's a biter. So no, I enjoyed just hearing you two. I enjoyed just taking a back seat for this one and just hearing you two just talk about it. Obviously, I know
pretty young.
Yeah, she's only a couple of weeks old.
I have my Akane bait. Wrong animal.
So I've heard Howard's opinions quite a lot. I'm gonna have to be quick because we've got a minute. But hearing, obviously, I haven't gone into depth hearing Benedict's opinion, so I just quite like stepping back and just letting them two go backwards and forwards in this one and hearing their opinions. So yeah, that was quite nice. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was really fun, and thank you for joining us today, Nick.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here. The kitty says subscribe.
Subscribe. Anyway, we've got 40 seconds left. I am now timing it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Keep your ears.
Until we see you here, wherever you are, whatever. Until next time, for now, keep your ears to the east. Subscribe.